90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast, is made possible by listeners just like you. If you want to help us out, you can go to 90milesfromneedles.com/donate or text NEEDLES to 53555.
Think the deserts are barren wastelands? Think again. It's time for 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome to 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Clarke, and it has been more than 6 months since the last time I've shared a piece of my writing with y'all. I spent some of last weekend at Desert Voices, which was a writers' gathering put together by the Joshua Tree National Park Association and its Desert Institute. It was here in Joshua Tree, and I was reminded how much I like writing and sharing my writing. Got a really generous and warm reception from people that were there. And so I thought I would do it again, especially since this week is a little crowded with non-podcast tasks. This is something that I wrote when I first moved to the desert, which was 18 years ago. It is amazing how time flies when you're having heat stroke. But before that, I wanted to note that we have a new donor who prefers to remain anonymous. This person dropped $200 into our Desert Defenders campaign, our main fundraising campaign, and then turned around and put in another $250 for the Fellowship for Desert Reporting. You know who you are. Thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful here, and if you, listener, want to join in on the fun, you can go to 90milesfromneedles.com/donate or /fellowship, respectively, to get to either of those campaigns. We couldn't do it without you. We'll always make this podcast available to listen to for free to anyone that wants to listen, but it does take money to put it together, especially now that it costs significantly more to travel to places in the desert to interview people than it did before we picked a fight with Iran. So, 90milesfromneedles.com/donate, 90milesfromneedles.com/fellowship. And with that, let's go back in the retrospect machine to summer 2008 in Mojave National Preserve. Hope you enjoy. Cima, California, August 2008. You know you're in a small town when your post office box number is lower than your age. The post office at Cima, California has about 60 boxes, so it's theoretically possible that everyone who gets mail there is lucky that way. I'm not sure why they have that many boxes, honestly. The 2000 census counted 21 residents of Cima. That was 8 years ago. If anything, the town has dwindled a bit in the interim. Cima mainly consists of one old, tattered building, with the south half holding the post office, and the north half a rarely open general store. There's a house behind the post office that was the former postmaster's residence, until she became too frail to take care of herself and moved in with her daughter in Baker, 45 miles away. There's a dirt parking lot with a payphone, and a few nearby abandoned miners' shacks ranging in condition from on the verge of collapse to collapsed. The town's remaining housing stock is scattered and hidden among the rock outcrops and Joshua trees at the ends of various obscure dirt roads. More than once in Cima, while cooling my heels in the post office parking lot, I've been approached by tourists and asked how many more miles it is to Cima. The town is rendered prominently on maps of the preserve, the way Newark might be on a map of the greater New York area. Sometimes it takes a few minutes to sink in. Puzzling over their maps as their rental cars click in the heat, that they really are smack dab in the center of town. I suppose I could have gotten a post office box in Nipton, where I live. Picking up my mail here involves a 50-mile round trip. But coming to Cima Dome for as many years as I have, it just seemed fitting to have a Cima, California mailing address. The desert writer Ed Abbey for years claimed a Wolf Hole, Arizona address. Wolf Hole was, in those days, a stock tank and a concrete pad. I've always found that romantic. Anyway, I pass through Cima twice a week or so on my way to my typical haunts on the dome, so there is a semblance of practicality to my decision. I usually stop here at 6 or 7 in the evening, as the light slants low in the west and the air cools, and the little counter in the post office is boarded up tight. Today, I'm here early. The sun's high. It's still morning, and a desert spiny lizard scrabbles out of my way on the sidewalk as I pull the screen door open. Oh, hi. Cima's acting postmaster greets me cheerfully from behind the counter. She's a pleasant woman, middle-aged and blonde and talkative. When I show up during the day, it sometimes takes me 45 minutes to get my mail. Haven't seen you here for a few weeks. How's the book coming? Chris is writing a book on Joshua trees. I realize there's someone else in the room with us. A smallish, grizzled man, partly hidden behind the front door, sitting on a low crate. He fixes me with a stare I've seen in 100 small towns across the West. It's not an unfriendly stare. It's more a stare that mixes curiosity and suspicion in equal proportions, reserving the right to become unfriendly depending on my comportment during an unspecified probationary period. You're not from around here, he says evenly. Chris is living in Nipton, the acting postmaster observes. Where were you before that? He asks. Up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I answer, confirming every single one of his suspicions. Surprisingly, though, he warms up to me. Well, you certainly came to the right place to write your book, he smiles. Did you know that this is the biggest Joshua tree forest in the world right here? I nod. I did know that. Well, did you know that we have some of the world's oldest Joshua trees in Cima? Some of them on my place are 700-800 years old. Now, it is a near certainty that no Joshua tree of that age exists anywhere on the planet. At least not a single-stem Joshua tree. The trees do have a bit of folkloric reputation for reaching very advanced ages, but their maximum lifespan is probably more like 250 years. And that age achieved only rarely. Nonetheless, I have had it made known to me rather forcefully on a few occasions that my tendency to correct misstatements of fact is not uniformly perceived as helpful by those being corrected. Besides, this is local color. I make a non-committal noise somewhere in the back of my throat, nod and smile. Oh, you've got a piece of registered mail here. The acting postmaster disappears behind the wall for a moment, then returns bearing a large, flat envelope. I sign for it, then open it, as she turns to talk to her neighbor some more. It's 2 copies of the final mediated agreement between Becky and me, dissolving our marriage and disposing of our joint property. I'm supposed to sign 1 copy and send it back to the mediator, then keep the other in case I ever need to prove I'm divorced. The document's arrival isn't a surprise. I talked to Becky on the phone yesterday. During that conversation, she suggested it might be showing up soon. Nothing in the agreement is particularly galling. The mediator remarked during the process on the care with which Becky and I treated each other along the way. When we got to the part about her buying me out of the house, I mentioned a dollar amount. She shook her head and said my suggestion wasn't fair, and then made a counteroffer that was significantly higher. Every provision in this thing shows one of us being generous to the other. It's as much a love letter as it is a divorce document, an incongruity that somehow makes signing it all the more difficult to face. The mediator has made it easy. He included a postage-paid envelope for me to use to send back the signed copy. All I need is a pen. And there's one right here duct taped to a bead chain. I could get this over with right now. Instead, I slide the papers back into the envelope unsigned, stumble a few feet over to box 43 to get the rest of my mail. There's a week's accumulation in the small box, and it takes a bit of a struggle to remove it all. "It's just ridiculous," the acting postmaster is saying to the grizzled man. "The Park Service just wants to control our lives. There's no way they can kill all the exotic plants in the preserve, right, Chris?" I lost the thread of the conversation while I was preoccupied with my mail, but I rally. Invasive exotic plants spreading through the desert? That's something I know about. "Well, I can't say I blame them for trying personally," I tell them. "Some of the exotic plants coming in are really a threat. The red brome grass, for instance. And there's Sahara mustard growing on the south edge of the preserve now. That stuff scares me, honestly. It's a huge fire hazard." The grizzled man scoffs. They don't even know which plants are exotic and which ones are native. They take out the plants that aren't native, they'd be taking out most of the landscape. You know, even the Joshua trees aren't native. Did you know that? The Spanish brought them. I take a minute to think that one over. This guy says he's got 800-year-old Joshua trees on his property, so I do the math in my head, adding 800 to 1492, and get a number rather larger than 2008. This gentleman holds two mutually contradictory beliefs in his head without noticing the incongruity, and the fact that both beliefs are wrong just makes my own head hurt all the more. He looks at me expectantly. "I hadn't heard that before," I eventually managed to say. "It's the truth," he says. "You ought to put that in your book." "I certainly will," I tell him. And then I take my stack of mail out to the Jeep, get behind the wheel, and head uphill a few miles toward the summit of the dome. Of course, Joshua trees grew here and in the rest of the Mojave long before any Spaniards arrived in the vicinity. In fact, Joshua trees grew here for some time before Spaniards existed, or Spain for that matter. The trees were well established in the vicinity of Cima Dome when what is now Spain was a chilly plain in the shadow of the glaciated Pyrenees, its inhabitants hunting reindeer and bison with bone tools. The trees have been here a long time. But not forever. The grizzled man had one thing right. At some point in the past, the first Joshua trees arrived here from somewhere else, and they didn't get here on their own. They had help.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.
We'll return to Cima Dome in just a second, but it is time for our weekly contribution by nature sound recordist Fred Bell, who attaches a note to this track saying, "I love this track because every stream has a different sound. This one has a rhythmic bass note that reminds me of a conga drum. Do you hear it?" Let's see. This is Nevada Stream, recorded by Fred Bell. Enjoy.
You're listening to 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast. If you love visiting the desert, why not help us protect it?
This business of plant populations migrating can take some getting used to. The very word plant connotes stuck in one place. When we decide not to move around anymore, we talk of putting down roots. Aside from the iconic tumbleweed, a non-native plant brought to the Wild West by the Russians, plants don't put a whole lot of miles on the odometer once they've germinated. Plant populations, though, are a different matter. If a plant can disperse its seeds somehow, its offspring can grow many miles away from their parents. Plants have evolved many strategies to move their seeds around. The seeds can be lofted on the breeze in the manner of a dandelion seed, or stuck fast to an animal's fur like a red brome awn, or flown first class in a berry-eating bird's gut, or even dropped off a tumbleweed driven before a strong wind. If they land in a place where they can germinate and survive to reproductive maturity, and if their seeds do the same thing, and if generation after generation of plants each disperses its seed into areas where those plants had not yet grown, and if, while this is going on, environmental conditions change over time the way they always do, then each plant species will migrate. The individual plants that make up a species die out in places that have become less hospitable, but if they're lucky, their descendant seeds will germinate in new and better places. When the planet cools, plants that can't survive cold migrate to warmer places. When the climate warms again, they may well turn around and march on back. It's not deliberate migration, of course. Plants have no way of knowing which way their seeds will go. Random chance rules the world, and each seed is more likely to end up in a bad spot than a good one. But make enough seeds and disperse them efficiently enough, and enough seeds beat the odds that your species lives on. Staggeringly slow tsunamis of plants moving across the landscape, thriving where they can, dying out where they cannot thrive. At my favorite campsite near the top of the dome, I pull off the dirt road and set up my camping chair in the shade of the Jeep. I close my eyes for 3 minutes, or 4, until the soft whit of the bell sparrows off in the blackbrush becomes louder than the blood noise in my ears. I open my mail again. The agreement is still there. Signature still pending. A last detail left hanging in a partnership we'd never planned to end. Live with someone long enough and, invariably, even after the relationship ends, an image of the other remains behind. An impression they had molded into your life. At some point, you realize that you've been sticking to your half of the bed, despite the whole bed now being available. That you, for months, have been declining to buy cilantro even though she was the one who didn't like the stuff. You have been living for some time with a ghost of one you left behind. I remember I have a pen in my shirt pocket. I don't reach for it. The Joshua trees here bloomed well 6 months ago, and now about 1 in 5 bears a panicle of dried fruit. Stiff tan arrangements of pods atop branches heavily defended with daggers. I've pulled more than one seed pod off the Joshua trees here. It ain't easy. The trees seem hell-bent on keeping their seeds to themselves. They're just plain lousy at seed dispersal. The trees disperse seeds less effectively than just about any other plant I know. And yet 12,000 years or so ago, when the deserts got hotter and drier, and the pinyons and junipers migrated upslope, Joshua trees moved to new, cooler places and survived. Something must have helped them move. But what? I take a look at the rest of my stack of mail. Bills, mainly. A card from a friend. She's concerned about me lately for some reason. There's another large envelope. It's from my soon-to-be ex-wife. What now? I swallow hard and open it. Inside is a short, distantly friendly note. 2 short scientific papers I printed out last year and forgot to pack. A few stray pieces of mail that came to the old house. And a print of a painting by Buell. Carl is a paleontological illustrator of some repute he's also a good friend, and this painting is a token of that friendship. It shows my late dog Zeke and me in the Mojave. Carl has taken some liberties with us. I'm about 30 pounds lighter in the painting, for one thing. Zeke and I are standing among Joshua trees and junipers with a giant freshwater lake in the distance, meaning he's transported us back in time 12 or 15,000 years. And we have company. With us is a friendly, monstrous, and shambling thing the size of a large cow. It has a big, inquisitive-looking leathery nose and lips, wide-set eyes, a neck like a horse, a thick tail dragging on the ground. It walks on its knuckles, 4 or 5 inch talons on paws fore and aft, a setup that looks pretty damn ungainly. And all of it, aside from those long claws and rubbery muzzle, is covered in shaggy, matted fur with a pale green tinge. It's the Shasta giant ground sloth, Nothrotheriops shastensis. 15,000 years ago, the Mojave was full of them. 5 genera of ground sloth lived in North America and about 75 more in South America. The largest North American ground sloth stood taller on all fours than do African bull elephants. Nothrotheriops, by comparison, was a dainty thing, weighing only about 1/4 of a ton. The smallest ground sloth in North America. It made up for its relatively diminutive stature by growing bony nodules beneath its skin. Armor enough to deter saber-toothed cats looking to score an easy meal. I tear up a little looking at the print. This imagined freshwater lake dried up in the distant past. The sloth went extinct about 11,000 years ago, and last year, so did Zeke. Who's left? Just the Joshua trees and me. The two of us merely the least extinct thing Carl portrayed. Paleontologists specializing in the Pleistocene have it tough. The profession requires a certain amount of obsessive-compulsive behavior, what with the meticulous documentation of fossil locations, the painstaking cleaning of the fossils themselves, and the need to save everything in the fossil's matrix so that researchers can examine microfossils, pollen, insect eggs, DNA, and other evidence of the local ecosystem at the time of the macrofossil's entombment. And yet, so many fossils are found in places that would send meticulous people screaming in horror. Ancient urine-soaked pack rat middens, swamps filled with liquid tar, and on special occasions, desert caves filled hip-high with what the scientists call coprolites, fossil turds. In the arid Southwest, if your typical animal turd is protected from the elements, it will sometimes mummify instead of rotting away. As paleontologists explored the desert in the 19th and 20th centuries, they found one cave after another with thick floors of mummified dung, deposited by Pleistocene monsters of various species. Mammoth, mastodon, horse, camel. At Gypsum Cave east of Las Vegas, and at Rampart Cave inside the Grand Canyon, and in a number of other similar places in the Southwest, paleontologists found that Shasta ground sloths had used caves as shelters for millennia. And being large herbivores, they filled up those caves with the remains of sloth meals. Those ancient feces piled up hip-deep in the case of Rampart Cave, which, at the time of its discovery, held the largest deposit of sloth dung known to science. Recognizing the value of the stuff in determining what sloths ate, among other things, researchers started sending shipments of sloth shit to prestigious museums. The Smithsonian's collection is said to be formidable, and there is, I have heard, a specimen on display at the American Museum of Natural History, neatly labeled with a card that reads, "Deposited by Theodore Roosevelt." One researcher in possession of a Rampart Cave specimen about the size of a softball describes it as smelling, quote, "sweet, like incense, with no lingering odor of ammonia or feces," end quote. The researchers picked the coprolites apart, examining them closely to determine what each of the contributing meals had contained. They found that the Shasta ground sloth had a moderately varied vegetarian diet, with about 6 different plants making up most of the bulk. Desert globe mallow, ephedra, a couple of grasses, agaves, etc. And as it turned out, Yucca brevifolia was part of that cetera. Shasta ground sloths ate Joshua trees with some regularity, eating the leaves and young shoots and, presumably, on occasion, those rigid clusters of ripe seed pods. Their claws would have been perfect for bending tall, spiny Joshua tree limbs so that they could reach the fruit. For that matter, those tall, spiny stems would have been perfect for keeping the fruit away from almost everything except ground sloths. Once the sloths swallowed the fruit, the seeds inside would have been bathed in stomach acid, weakening their seed coats and increasing the likelihood of germination. After a while, the sloth having knuckle-walked perhaps a dozen miles or more after eating, it would plant those pre-treated Joshua tree seeds along with a handy softball-sized dose of organic fertilizer. Or so the story goes. Truth be told, there are some pesky details that keep the Shasta ground sloth Joshua tree seed dispersal hypothesis from being fully accepted by Joshua treeologists. Mummified sloth dung does often contain bits of Joshua tree leaves and stems, but remains of fruit are rarer. 9 feet in reach seems impressive, but Joshua trees regularly exceed 20 feet in height, and their fruit develop at the ends of the tree's stout stems. In some Joshua tree forests, Shasta ground sloths would have been unable to reach the majority of ripe fruits. It's possible, in fact, that the primary disperser of Joshua tree seeds during the Pleistocene is still busily dispersing those seeds today. The white-tailed antelope ground squirrel, a rodent ubiquitous in the Mojave that's often mistaken for a chipmunk, is a voracious collector of Joshua tree seeds. The squirrels have no trouble reaching fruit on even the highest branches, and they can easily chew through the overripe fruit's spongy husks, releasing the seeds. They then distribute many of those seeds into caches secreted around the landscape. And when they inevitably forget where some of those cache seeds are, those seeds can germinate and create a new generation of Joshua trees. Antelope squirrels are efficient enough dispersers of Joshua tree seeds that some models suggest they could account for the species' present distribution all on their own, which is not a slam dunk disproof of the sloth hypothesis. It's possible that both animals played a role in moving Joshua tree seeds from place to place 15,000 years ago. Sloths may have distributed seeds in ripe fruit, which could then have germinated within a day or two, while the remaining fruit then became spongy protective covers that guarded the seeds until antelope ground squirrels could get to them. What drove the Shasta ground sloth to extinction 11,000 years ago is still a matter of some debate. Some say the extinction of North America's big animals, like the Shasta ground sloth at the end of the Pleistocene, came about due to climate change. Or the smoking gun could have been the Southwest's first people. Giant, ungainly, slow herbivore meets hungry pack hunters with armor-piercing stone tools? Do the math. Either way, doesn't matter from the Joshua tree's perspective. Whether the cause was climate change or Clovis points, the Shasta ground sloth is no more. As the sloth went extinct, the Joshua tree lost its main means of having its offspring move to potentially more suitable climates farther afield than 100 yards from the parent plant. 20,000 years ago, when the species' range extended much farther south, there was a population of Joshua trees in the Ajo Mountains, now part of Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. It's entirely possible that descendants of those ancient trees now grow in California or in Nevada or Utah, brought there generation by generation in the guts of Shasta ground sloths. There's also fossil evidence of Joshua trees about 30 miles outside of Tucson in the Waterman Mountains, dating to just over 12,000 years ago. That was shortly before the sloth met its doom. And though it's not impossible that descendants of those Waterman Mountains trees still live hundreds of miles to the north, it's far less likely. Now we face climate change that is already swifter and more severe than the shakeup at the end of the Pleistocene, and Joshua trees are once again likely to die out in at least the southern parts of their range. But this time around, they have no sloths to carry their descendants northward to Idaho. Here, the Joshua tree stands today, its future relying in part on a partnership with a seed-dispersing animal that no longer exists. I pull the pen from my pocket. The sloth may well have brought the Joshua tree here from its place of origin. Plant and animal, living and traveling together for thousands of years. I slide the paperwork from its envelope. A finely tuned partnership ended. I sign next to the hand-drawn X. The desert tree must now, somehow, manage on its own. Well, it is difficult to return to 2026 from 2008. But what choice do we have? We got to deal with what we've been handed. I do have some updates to keep in mind. The Cima post office closed in 2010, replaced by a series of mailboxes on the side of the road. A decade later, Cima Dome itself was ravaged by a wildfire, the Dome Fire, that covered 43,000 acres, including that campsite where I was sitting, and killed somewhere between 800,000 and 1.3 million Joshua trees, depending on who you ask. And Becky and I are still good friends. I will be driving past the closed Cima post office on my way to Las Vegas with the pit bull in the front seat, and I will say hello to that closed post office for all of you. Again, thanks to our anonymous donor for giving to our Desert Defenders Fund and our Fellowship for Desert Reporting. And again, you can go to 90milesfromneedles.com/donate or /fellowship to make donations of the size and frequency you desire, whether one-time or recurring on a monthly or yearly basis. It has been a beautiful few days in this part of the Mojave, with daytime temperatures getting up above 90, at least here in 29 Palms. But then the temps drop down into sweater weather as soon as the sun goes down, which is good for us because we walk the dogs then. Really, this is ideal desert weather. It's just enough heat to remind you where you are, but cooling down enough at night that you can get 8 or 9 hours of sleep, or in my case last night, 10. We've got a lot of really important episodes coming up, including the other side of the High Desert Art Fair issue, plans for a second parallel border wall in Arizona, including at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, which already has more border wall than is really needed. How much is needed, Chris? Well, actually none, I think. None would be good. None more miles of wall. None existing miles of wall. We're also looking into an update on the Rio Bosque wetlands in El Paso, one of the last little surviving riparian wetlands of that stretch of the Rio Grande. And maybe you're working on an issue that needs magnification or amplification or support or all three. Just let me know, Chris at 90milesfromneedles.com. Stay well until next week, everyone. And those of you who've reached out about the dog and her health, thank you so much. It means a lot. Keep loving that desert. It needs you. Bye now.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast. You can find show notes for this episode along with links and background at 90milesfromneedles.com. We're also on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. Just search for 90 Miles from Needles. And if you'd like a more direct line, you can reach us on Signal at hey90mfn.67. If you'd like to support the show, you can make a donation of whatever size and frequency feels right to you at 90milesfromneedles.com/donate. Listener support is what makes this podcast possible. Our voiceover is by Joe Jeffrey. Podcast artwork is by Martine Mancha. Nature sounds are recorded by Fred Bell. Our theme song, Moody Western, is by Brightside Studio, with additional music licensed from independent artists.
Additional music in this episode is by RV Studio, Audio Zen, and iCentury.
90 Miles from Needles is a production of the Desert Advocacy Media Network.